All right, everybody, welcome to this month's Tuesday Talks. This is our virtual series. We host these monthly, and we're really excited to welcome back Angela Meleca, who has been in the OAPN circle for quite a few years. When Angela worked at, which is now Creative Ohio, it was Ohio Citizens for the Arts. We connected back in the day. Angela came and spoke at our 2024 conference in Toledo and had just such a wonderful session that the reviews and the feedback from her session from our conference were just so positive. So she was kind enough to join us again for our virtual Tuesday Talk series. I'd like to give you a little more background on Angela for those of you who weren't at our conference. I should probably introduce myself first. I'm sorry. I'm Jessica Rosenblatt. I am the Executive Director of the Ohio Arts Professionals Network. But Angela, she recently founded Meleca Creative, but she is a national leader in arts advocacy and a creator of the Collaborative Arts Public Value Initiative. Meleca Creative brings more than 30 years of experience across policy, communications, nonprofit strategy, and systems change. Angela led a coalition that raised over $160 million in public funding for arts organizations and developed tools that now help leaders across the country measure outcomes like empathy, belonging, and social well-being, which are the outcomes that matter in the arts. Today's conversation will kind of start in one space, and then we want to make sure we open it up to you guys who are on the call for questions at the end. But Angela has her ARTS Redefined podcast, which Angela is a wealth of knowledge. So we are just going to kind of kick off the conversation. Angela, please go ahead. Feel free to reintroduce yourself, and we'll kick this series off. And I'll probably toss some questions your way as we go. I
Perfect.
pass the baton to you, Angela.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm so excited to be here. You are such a warm and friendly face to see. I don't see it often enough. I tend to like to approach this in a casual style. So I do have some slides that I'll share, but really like to have more of an informal conversation so you can get the most out of this time together. I do have focused the last 15 years or so on arts advocacy in particular, but my background is journalism and politics. I don't have an arts background, but I have applied what I've learned professionally in government relations and policy, as well as communication storytelling, to really what I call translate to policymakers primarily, but decision makers, stakeholders, community leaders, the impact of the arts and why it is essential. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what's not working and why it's not working, and how we're shifting the conversation forward thinking, and how we can really transform advocacy, which then would ultimately help you in sustainability and capacity building. So I know a lot of you are not on camera, but I just wanted to get a sense, how many attended AFTCON or went to the conference? Okay. I did not go. I had a conflict, and I'll be really transparent. I think AFTA does a great job in what they do, but it's about decades outdated in really, I think, helping serve the sector. And a lot of feedback that I got, and I'm primarily speaking from an advocacy standpoint, for lawmakers or decision makers, a lot of the feedback that I heard from people who attended were a little frustrated because everybody wants to know, what are the tools and strategies that we can use to advance the sector? We're feeling undervalued. Certainly, we are overlooked. We're disregarded. We're not viewed as relevant. And so a few years ago, when I left Creative Ohio, I started what I called a renaissance of relevance, where I really felt that if this sector was viewed as relevant, resources and revenue would follow. And so the tools that I heard coming out of the conference were, call your legislator, right? Like, how many times have we heard that? Email or call your legislator. I don't know about you, and this was my world. Who thinks that that's effective or going to make any change? I don't know really of anyone that doesn't go anywhere, right? And so we need more tangible skills or tools in which what can we do to make a difference? And I actually argue, and again, sometimes this can be upsetting to people, that I wouldn't put a lot of my energy right now into the federal government and NEA. I wouldn't put a lot of my energy right now into certain city or state legislators or bodies, depending on what political affiliation they are, because we just don't know. Everything's so volatile. So I would start focusing on the lower hanging fruit of, foundations or different funding mechanisms to where we can get attention and get a seat at the table. I will add, though, the $160 million that we did generate in 3.5 years came from Republicly led administration and legislature, and probably the most conservative Republican caucus in Ohio state history. And we did that because we changed the language. We changed the language on arts impact to language that those legislators understood. So I'm going to just show you a few slides of kind of where I'm coming from, why if I can figure out which screen I'm supposed to share. Here we go. Um, so I know this is a little blurry. Sorry, I'm pulling from other presentations that I'm giving. But where I'm coming from is I'm tired, and I'm sure you are as well, but I'm tired of the same data sets or impact that we talk about, right? So in 2004, Tennessee Live Music Funds needed 16.5 million to operate their venues. I'm sure all of you or most of you here can relate to these types of kinds of data sets. But yet, when we look at the Tennessee argument for funding, they say that live music is a $1.4 billion economic impact. The Live Music Fund needs only 16.5 million, and $0 are allocated for that. So through my work and literally sitting across the table from lawmakers, economic impact numbers don't resonate. Perhaps they did in the 80s or 90s when that's all we could measure, but we're not seeing the needle move at all, because if the economic data mattered, we wouldn't have to feel like we constantly have to justify why we should get invested in, why we're important. So if we look at old advocacy versus new advocacy, we've got to start talking in ways that resonate with whomever is in the seat to make the decision. And I'll add this as well. When we hear of arts councils or arts agencies, whether they're a local or state, we often refer to them as the funders, right? Because they're the ones that are distributing the funding. I refer to them at times as funnelers. The funders are the individuals in the positions of policy that are deciding whether or not we're going to allocate a percentage of sales tax for arts and culture. The funders are the ones who are going to decide in the state budget how much we're going to allocate to the state arts council. Those funnelers, if you will, have to prove arts value as well. So when you get a grant application, what are you asked? What's your audience size? What's your budget size? How many tickets did you sell? Those are outputs. Those aren't impact or outcomes. What I believe moves the needle, and we're beginning to see it in the early stages of the work that we've been doing recently, is I look at impact first. Why do you do what you do? I work with a theater who wants to create or foster a more empathetic community. We have in the arts, we know that we have job preparedness skills. We know that people that participate in arts organizations, test scores improve. So why don't we think about what are the highest or the most challenging obstacles that lawmakers face in communities across the country? And the arts as problem solvers, how can we start looking at the problems that we solve through art? So it's impact first, art second. So the old advocacy, rather than focusing on economic impact, let's focus on how the arts prepare mental well-being, social cohesion, job preparedness. We talk about, again, that the arts generate X billion dollars in economic activity. When I hear that, my mind kind of goes off to, so what? because it's not a game changer for us. We need to start talking about how the arts strengthen innovation, improve mental health, and foster connectivity. You know, the loneliness epidemic that we hear, we know that the arts foster a sense of belonging. We know that when we're dealing with veterans associations, that they have art workshops for vets that help combat loneliness, help them feel more connected to community, suicide prevention, recovery programs. We need to start capturing data that is what I call a return on art, to say this is the return on the investment that you, city, state, or federally, or foundation are going to get. So again, outdated advocacy, we need to evolve that advocacy. Rather than call your legislator, let's start focusing on showing outcomes that they care about. So number one, we all listen and pay attention, I'm sure, to the news, and we hear about math scores are down, or we hear about housing insecurity, or there are other issues that are pressing, whether it's how, food insecurities, all of those things. Where can our programming apply to be a solution? Where are we a solution to the challenges that affect so many of our communities? How do we start telling those stories with data? So, stories without substance, we need to have data to back that to deepen the trust. So, again, when I'm talking about being the translator of arts impact to those non creatives, we have to speak in language they understand. So, I'm coming from a place of, if I'm a venture capitalist, my first question is, what's my return on investment? So let's start talking about what's the return on investing in the arts. So here's a quick example of when I think about how we can embrace change. Think about taxi cabs and Uber. And if you look at the taxi model, which I believe is kind of how the arts continue to operate, we're siloed in our organizations. We say attendance equals success. We often think that there's a one size fits all program. We're exclusive or centralized. We protect our turf. There's a lot of, this competitor feeling. And we look at legacy metrics. Again, we go back to just the tried and true, what we think, decades old economic impact. But let's start looking at Uber model. Uber didn't reinvent transportation, but they reinvented how we meet that, or how we're served by that. So let's look at cross-sector partnerships. Let's talk about outcomes equal impact. Again, community-informed design. Let's talk about impact first. How are we impacting our community through the medium of art, whether it's visual or performance, film, anything that you talk about, creative technology? How are we solving problems? We need to be embedded into communities so we're indisposable, with shared tools and infrastructure, and then real-time data and evidence. So I worked with a cohort, or still am working with a cohort of 20 organizations across the country to apply a new logic model for measuring arts impact. And when we decided what do we want to measure, and we wanted something that was going to be, I'm going to stop share this for a second. If I can stop share. We wanted to build a tool that could be applied regardless of your organization's size, discipline, and location. We also wanted to look at what are these human service well-being outcomes that we know that the arts provide. I'm going to give you a quick story. Last summer, I was watching a news story, a CBS news story, and it was on a symphony in Boston. And and some of you may have seen this story, and right when the symphony ended, right before you hear the applause, somebody yells, "Wow," in the audience. And right after the wow, you hear a little chuckle, and then people start applauding and clapping. And you obviously can understand that people are laughing a little bit, because when's the last time you've been to a symphony or some kind of traditional performance and somebody yells wow in the middle of the performance? So the executive director of that symphony emailed every ticket buyer, because he wanted to find who yelled wow, because he too thought that that was fantastic. And he found the individual that bought the ticket, he took his 9-year-old grandson to the symphony. The grandson is autistic. The family was told that he would be nonverbal his entire life. At the end of the performance, the 9-year-old, nonverbal to that date grandson yelled, "Wow." The grandfather was so overcome because of two things: the shock, obviously, of him speaking, but then also like, "Oh my gosh, you don't yell out," in the middle of the or at the performance, took his grandson and left. When they tracked him down, yes, I got goosebumps too when I saw this, and I get goosebumps when I tell it every time. Since then, what the symphony has done is they now take a musician to the home and they perform for the grandson, once a quarter. And they've now since written a book, a picture book called "The Boy Who Yelled Wow." And in my sort of cynical, I don't know what my mind is, frustrated mind, at the end of the story, I sat back and I thought, so what? Right? Because it's so frustrating to me, and I'm not doing the transformational work that you all are doing, but I'm frustrated because we know you see on a daily basis the number of individuals that you transform because of your work, but yet it doesn't move the needle. We don't know how to collectively tell that story. So we're viewed as a preventative. We are the counter to so many challenges and issues that we face. So my desire was, how do we build a tool that can show the wow in data? So I was introduced to a woman who is an organizational and industrial psychologist. She spent the last 20 years measuring outcomes in the social nonprofit sector. And the first question I asked her was, "Sherry, can you measure kindness?" "Yes." "Can you measure empathy?" "Yes." "Critical thinking, creativity, job preparedness skills?" "Yes, yes, yes, yes." All of these other industries do it. The healthcare industry does it. We don't measure how many surgeries we perform a year. We used to count impact, right? But that's an output. Hospitals now measure how many surgeries were successful, how many interventions are successful in a myriad of other industries. Schools are doing it now with education programming. Even Nike and our big brands are measuring what the return on what are you getting from a public impact on a myriad of brands. How about face cream? Right? We measure, you look at a face cream and it says 92% of people using the cream said fine lines diminished after 4 weeks of consistent use. We're measuring outcomes in every other aspect but the arts. So we set out with also the gracious willingness of organizations to come along this journey as a collective to talk about, what do we want to measure? We have experts that came in to build a tool on how we measure that. And then we partnered with Miami University in Ohio to have interns help these organizations build the surveys, collect the data, and upload the data in a real-time database. And so I'm going to go back to share my screen because we're getting the results from the first 5 months of collecting this data. And we're seeing that empathy scores are coming in, that 69% improved measured behavioral change. Their empathy increased. We're seeing that loneliness dropped over 50% after one arts program cycle. If we can start taking this data to go into a funder, whether it's a foundation, whether it's a community foundation, a family foundation, even if there are some legislators and we talk about the loneliness epidemic and we're showing them in real-time ROA data, that is going to move the needle. And collectively doing it together, we're measuring apples to apples. It's not this organization over here is going to measure something this way, and then these people over here are going to ask it that way. We're taking these organizations by the hand and we're leading them through step by step. We've developed about 20 different measurement stacks. What do you want to measure? Think of it as a menu, and you come in and pick 2 or 3. And then we have verified, validated questions that have been researched and validated by UCLA and MIT, et cetera, that prove the questions that we need to ask to measure empathy. We're doing this with 21st century learning skills. So we're doing pre-post surveys. So when we have arts education programs, we're getting a baseline at the beginning of those programs, and then we're interviewing those participants afterward. It's those kinds of data and language that we're going to beginning to apply that proves the return on art. If you are interested, and I'm thinking that I can do this now, and if I do this while I am talking on the fly, I'm going to give you an inside look of the database that we're using. This is the collective, and again, we're operating as a backbone organization. So we fundraised to enable, and this is loading, and then I'll share it, that we were able to license a software component that will tell you in real time what your impact is as a result of your questionnaire. I don't know why it's taking forever to load, so I'm going to continue to talk while I'm watching this try to load. Because we also know that when we've participated in any kind of research data studies, although the majority have been focused around outputs, numbers, budget sizes, those typically are a snapshot of, for sure, when we do economic impact, we're looking at sales tax receipts from usually it's 2 years prior. So when we have data today in 2025, typically we're talking about 2023 numbers or 2024 at best. Again, those come off, and I don't know why this isn't loading, those come off and seem outdated, right? When we then look at, perhaps we do a snapshot and we survey audiences on their feelings about a particular program. Again, that's typically we're looking at 6 to 9 months, maybe 12 months, to where we're going to survey these audiences. We capture that information and then we calculate it. Okay, here we are. And we have last year, our survey results are here. What we're doing now is we're marrying technology with arts impact or arts evaluation, if you will. So Meleca Creative Advisors is the backbone to this 20-person cohort. And you can see right now to date how this is, again, if you think about, any of your customer relationship management tools, CRMs, I call this a customer impact management tool, where we're tracking all of the impact. These are all the different outcomes that we're measuring, and we're tracking them in real time. So this data is continually updated. So at any time you have a grant that you need to apply for, if you're going to meet with a funder, if you want to do a marketing campaign and talk about the 21st century learning skills that people who come and participate in can learn in, this data will live here on and on, and we will then be able to benchmark it over time. So this again is the first 4 months. Imagine what the data we're going to show in 24 months. So this is more of a tech tool that I'm showing you. This is a really what makes the measuring revolutionary. What I focus on, my end of it, is the measures. What do we want to measure? What are those, and what are those outcomes, and how can we turn that information into communication? So I will look at global impact. Let me see if I can get details. So I'm able to identify this information by organization. I don't have any identifying information, so I don't know participants' names or addresses or anything like that. But all of that information, all of that data lives within the organization's own desktop. I'm seeing the global collective numbers. Each organization has their own, and they can go in and look at their own analysis and talk about the impact, and not only monitor and measure their own program's effectiveness, but they can also then see, even down by zip code, who is showing more effectiveness or accessibility, or is having more outcomes favorably than others. And then again, it's a tool that they can use for fundraising, certainly for public funding, argument's sake, and then for marketing and communications. I'm going to stop right there because I feel like I tend to get a little overwhelming with information, because this is work that I literally think about 24/7. And I just want to stop for a minute to see if anybody has any questions before I go on.
Let me start by saying that this is all incredible. We were aware that you were doing a lot of this behind the scenes. A couple of our members, of course, I believe, are working with you on this. And so first off, thank you for sharing all of this. This is an amazing tool, and I'm looking forward to seeing where the outcomes are, after you've collected more data. I'm assuming this question might be on on the list of what folks might ask, but you're talking about collecting all the data and then, of course, turning it into the ask. Are you working with these organizations, or are you in the process of assisting with the communications, how you take this sort of data to say, but now what does this equate to in dollars? Do you want to expand upon that?
Yes. So yeah, because there's several layers. First of all, the big challenge is to build awareness that you can measure these things now, right? I think for so long we always thought about these are just anecdotal, they're nice stories, but how can we capture the wow, right? And we're now measuring the wow. And so that's the first hurdle is we can measure these things. Then again, with thankful that these 20 organizations came together, and there was trust and there was collaboration that we're all going to do this together and have a proof of concept that you can measure these, which now we've seen the data coming in and it's there. So now the step again with this cohort is what do we do with the data now that we have it? And one of the things that I found is the individuals that are working on this project with each of these organizations still feel a little siloed within their own organization because it's still a little abstract. And it still is taking me time to kind of distill down how do I describe what we're doing in an easy, digestible way. And so, how do we tell team members that we're not just surveying audiences to survey audiences, but that we're gathering data so we can turn it into funding? So, here's an example. I'm working with a member of the cohort who has had their about 5 different subsets of data. One, which is, I think, 92% of participants in their programming feel safe and secure. And somebody actually, an audience member, complained. They got one complaint from that. And this is where they kind of knew that, oh, maybe we don't have buy-in across the team, because there were team members that kind of pushed back and said, see, why are we asking these questions? We don't want to intrude. These are invasive. But what we have found, what we can do with that data is this organization is affiliated with a university. The university's mission is to have well-being and sense of belonging among students. There had been an increase of suicide attempts and things like that. And so as they're greeting new students in, as they're going through recruitment, they want to develop the identity or the feeling of a safe community. With this data now, and with this particular organization, they're now going to go to that head of the university to say, we are a safe space. It's proven within this larger structure. So they're seeking funding from that source to build out programs across campus. So then they're kind of branding, they're taking the data that they found and they're now expanding it campus wide to build on that safe space. And they're kind of being that thought leader because they've got the data to capture to prove that. I don't know, Jessica, if that's helping give idea of how we're taking the data and we're turning it into action to
Yeah.
build stronger cross-sector collaborations, but also to deepen funding, because again, we're now being viewed as solvers of issues and concerns. It's no longer thought of just an arts institution. They're now branding it as a safe space for all, which we know we are, right? And we've talked about that before. If you think of libraries, if you think of other institutes, we're no different. Libraries kind of have data that capture that. This is what this type of data can do for you, is you can reposition You're not changing mission, you're not changing programming, but this tool enables you to reposition the impact that you're having because you're able to talk about it in a more humanistic way and show it with numbers.
This is great. Yeah, Dan, yes, please.
I'm not finding the raise hand icon available, uh, Jessica, but I have a question.
Sure.
I was fascinated with your Uber, the other one comparison, but I wasn't sure of the exact differences between outcomes and effects or whatever the terminology. Could you be a little more specific about that Uber chart to tell us the old and new ways?
Yeah. So the taxi system, and I came across this about a year ago, which really was like an interesting phenomenon to me because it taxis were embedded into it. We've always done it this way, right? Like it was, they had their own companies. They were all siloed. You called a number. It wasn't adaptable to fit the current audience, if you will, need. What Uber did is Uber made transportation more approachable, if you will, by forming an app, by making it that we're now in control of when we leave, how we get there, and what mode of transportation, rather than having the industry tell us this is how it has to be because we've always done it this way.
I know, Angela, but I was asking you to be specific about each of those parallels you were making in the chart. I didn't quite understand the differences in the parallels
Okay, I can
in
go back.
that chart.
Yeah, let me try to go back and pull that up real
We
quick.
all know what Uber is and what cabs were.
Yeah, yeah. Let me go back and see if I can get that real quick. Um, okay. I found it. Now I need to share. Where's my share screen? All right. I can't find where. Okay. Here we are. There we go.
Perhaps you can Uber to the solution.
Exactly. Oh, wrong screen I'm sharing. Yeah, this is the one thing where I need, it's the chewing gum and tapping your head and whatever all at the same time that I can't seem to do because I pulled up the other. Here we go.
That's it.
Yeah, let me see if I can make it bigger.
So, like, what's the difference between, well, just the Uber chart? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
No,
So siloed organizations. So again, when right now, when you think about our organizations, we typically advocate or think about institution and then best maybe region. A lot of times we're not talking about cross-sector collaboration where we have partnerships or we're working together to where a visual art component and a performing arts are collaborating together. Another point with that, an institution that I'm working with, their mission is to foster more curiosity among their patrons. But they're a multidiscipline organization, so they have film and visual arts and performing arts and education. And so when you think about something as abstract as curiosity, that can be interpreted differently, right, for each of the silos of within those disciplines. So how can we drill down to why is curiosity important? So we go through a program called the 5 whys and we figure out why do you want to do that? That then when you have the direct outcome of why are we doing this work? We're able to cross sector partnerships because then it becomes more adaptable or more relatable to the participant, to the audience, rather than we're a siloed and we do performing arts and this is what we're doing. That's more inward looking. We're talking about being more outward looking. Attendance equals success. So you could either talk about, whether the taxi model, again, I'm looking at more of outputs, right? Where they're counting the number of patrons. We need to look at outcomes. So it's not how many. Right now, we've sold, I just heard a statistic the other day, we served 17,000 students. Okay, great. What happened to those 17,000? By looking at outputs or by looking at outcomes equals impact, if you're a 2,000 seat theater, a presenting theater, and you're a 200 seat producing theater, you can't compete with that presenting theater today, the way the funding model is structured, because we reward larger, what we had called impact, but we reward larger outputs because we think, oh, we're serving a greater number. But by doing it this way, where we're measuring empathy, for example, we can now have an equal playing field because we can say, okay, what's the rate of empathy fostering with the 200 seat producing theater? And we could have this 2,000 seat theater. We're now doing apples to apples. We're not just relying on the volume, it's the transformation that's happening within those. The one size fits all program, again, it goes into, we've always done it this way. It's kind of like, this is the way it is, rather than having community informed design. Community informed design is, again, one of those things where I say, let's look at what are the needs of the community rather than this is the programming we're going to put on. What does the community actually need? Whether it's, deeper work within the education system to get math scores increased, or whether it's, again, housing insecurity or aging population. How is our work informing or affecting a community? And so do the impact first, and the art comes second. Embedded and flexible access, we're seeing better success when we can think about, rather than the mindset of come to us, here we are, and you come to our institution and our programming, why we need to start thinking more about how can we go to them, because that's the way that society has changed now, right? We're not how we operated or thought in the 1980s. Think about streaming, Netflix, all of those, where they're delivering that directly to you in your home. You don't have to leave and go to the theater, right? We now have to start thinking about how can we take the work that we do and go to them. Shared tools and infrastructure, again, part of the collaborative. The strength of it is that we're using the same measuring tool and component. We're speaking the same language. That was a huge key for success when we were doing the one-time funding during the pandemic, and we're able to get 70 million in one-time funding. We had, and Jessica was part of this. I mean, there was an army of individuals that were across every corner of Ohio that was speaking the same language. We were all in unison. So whether you're talking to somebody in Northeast Ohio or Southwest, all legislators were hearing the same logic, the same reasoning, and that was giving us a greater unified outcome of the money. And then real-time data and evidence. It just goes back to national generic statistics don't matter anymore. We can say that the arts improved test scores by 86%. But I can tell you, if Kim can walk into her legislator's office and say the McConnell's success rate for improved scores is 86%, that is a direct relation to the McConnell and what they are doing in their community. That is transformational. So you can just see where the arts do this, great. What are you doing today? And if we can start saying, this is what we're doing, think of even how that empowers you. And I was talking to a funder. I hope, Dan, that was helpful.
That's much clearer. Thanks so much, Angela.
You're welcome. I was talking to a funder actually the other day, and I was saying, if we could think about considering the arts as we're all problem solvers. And so what if we shifted our mind from, let's just pass out a ton of mini micro grants because we just want to, support as many artists as possible. And these were $500 grants, right? And everybody appreciates it, and that's great. But really, what is $500 doing to move the needle to help artists become sustainable on their own? And what if instead of doing 1,400 $500 grants, we did 400 $30,000 grants? I don't know. I don't do math, right? And this is a scary thing to think about. Again, I understand why we go to the masses, because they have to go to their lawmakers to say, we're serving 1,400 artists. They want that number to grow. Why? Because we don't know what else to measure. But if we could take 30 artists and say, we have a crisis in the school system, or we need elderly care, or we need art therapy or recovery. I know that there are programs that exist where we could hire artists to implant into communities, whether it's through music or visual arts, etc., that can improve those problems. So if we had a mind shift of, and we're the last in line, we're the first to get cut, we're overlooked, nobody's paying attention, we're silently shrinking, to, you know what, you're a creative problem solver. We want to be more innovative. We need you. We need your thought power to come help activate community needs. There's a mental shift that happens that we need to engage. And that's what I was telling a funder. We need to go to the creative community and engage them to come to the city's aid to help them solve their most pressing problems. That's where I'm hoping this data can couple that by saying we're teaching these skills anyway. We're teaching job preparedness skills. We're helping people feel less lonely. We're helping them feel more creative, which then that's what we get from the corporate America. We hear now that they're having less collaboration, less critical thinking, and less creativity on the workforce. And I say it's probably no wonder, because for the last 25 years, we've been focusing so much on STEM, and we've stripped creative thinking, creativity, the arts out of education, which we all know is a muscle that you need to continually use or you lose it. And so if we could start showing the data on these skills that the arts foster and grow and improve, and that if we just employ those into the workforce, use us to solve your problem, then I think we'll start seeing the tide shift. But it's taking it away from economic impact, because it's just it doesn't move the needle. If it did, we wouldn't be where we are. And it's taking it to, we are problem solvers. I needed data personally in my advocacy work to prove it. And that was maybe a selfish reason why I wanted to figure out a way, how can we prove it with data? And we came across this tool, and we've again, had these wonderful 20 organizations come on board, and now they have their own data that, to go back to your point earlier, Jessica, yes, we then work with them to say, okay, here's all the ways that you can use that data. Let's brainstorm with you so it can become actionable for you, as well as the collective data can be actionable for the sector.
This is great. So what kind of comes to mind after hearing you say all this? It kind of couple parts here, but it sounds like we're focusing more now on quality over quantity. So the ability to reach the actual humans and have that human connection for a few is more important than just reaching the masses and not having any impact on them.
And if yes and no, and what I've been told too, some programs, when we're talking about whether it's addiction or more serious, it has to be done in small groups of 5, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's still important. But if you think about now public value, so what's the public getting from 20 people who are becoming more empathetic because they attended theater, or 200 people who feel more confident in their critical thinking? Think of the ripple effect then that it has in the public value. So it's doing public good by growing and fostering this within individuals. And we can think about it, start small, but I also think that this is a way that we can grow audience, because now we can communicate to audience what you can expect out of this experience, not just it's Hamilton and it's this is the cast and here's Hamilton, but now we're able to ask the audiences, what are they taking away? What are they getting from that? Whether it's, I felt a sense of joy, or I felt a sense of belonging, or I felt more engaged in whatever of these different areas that we want to, or that we know that the arts have. We can now use that kind of as brands, where it's, do you want to feel like an Olympic athlete? Wear Nike, right? The just do it kind of thing. If we start thinking in those terms and taking the data, we can now tell those that have not experienced perhaps our product what they could expect to get from it, because 87% of our audience members say they walked away with this. So it may seem small, it's focusing on quality, but it's the quality effect is far reaching. The for every dollar you spend on an art ticket, $31 goes out into the general economy.
Got it.
It's
Yeah.
it's
Dan,
yeah.
thank you for that.
Angela, I want to know how you're addressing what's been a fundamental reason for the decline in the arts. Since No Child Left Behind was instituted 25 or 30 years ago, which was the emphasis on testing and STEM education, resulted in a specific, essentially crashing of the arts programming in schools, even music programs, marching bands, and so on. And my daughter is a brilliant art educator, and she deplores the notion that the arts are valuable only because they're a handmaiden to STEM, a handmaiden to addiction education, a handmaiden to these other subjects which are failing in their own right, as opposed to they're valuable because of the intrinsic valuable. I'm just wanting to know how in the work you're doing generally, you're connecting the dots between the fact that the arts are intrinsically valuable. We're the choir. We don't need to be convinced. And so we've scrambled to find rationales to explain them to people who are economically or now socially finding alternate reasons, to the point where an artist in a school is given the curriculum of how to teach music as the science of sound or audiology, which is, diverting us into um, other paths.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, thanks for asking that. I'm looking because I've got stacks of these books. I heard there was a secret chord. Again, this is where my frustration comes from. We have how many countless books of neuroscience and studies and medical fields about the impact of art on health, on the brain, all of that. And I hear what you're saying. STEAM, that name bothers me. I say just by sticking a letter in a word doesn't make a change or a difference. So I don't know. I'm hoping that this analogy is going to work, but it's something that somebody brought up to me and it was like, okay, this is the light bulb and this is what I'm trying to now work on. And you all can help me. Big tobacco. For years, the federal government put warning labels on cigarette packs, and we fought the cancer and warning on and on and on about smoking. And we tried to get smoking cessation, all of that down, and it didn't move the needle. Because when we thought about smoking, we thought about that's the individual, that's you. You want to smoke, fine. I'm not going to smoke. That's your problem. If I want to smoke, yeah, sure, I know the risk. It wasn't until secondhand smoke data came out and mothers realize that, wait, I can be sitting in a restaurant with my child and the person next to me is smoking and my child can be affected, damaged because of that. That is what shifted the tide. That's when policy changed because there was a groundswell. And so I'm looking at now, what is the secondhand impact effect of the arts? And it's going to take a grassroots effort. We need mothers, we need parents, we need individuals to understand. I don't care what socioeconomic where you live. We need to figure out how we take the example of big tobacco. And when the secondhand smoke data came out, I'm trying to figure out now with this data that we're collecting, what is the secondhand impact story? So your daughter is invested in greatly because we know that the work she's doing will impact everyone, all community, because we talk about if we had more empathetic individuals, we talk about this every day when you turn the news on and we see such divisiveness and we all know, if we just had the arts, look at, I know I'm preaching to the choir. We don't need to talk about the Kennedy Center. I mean, it's no reason why their ticket sales or subscriptions are down 50, 60, 70%, right? Because they're shifting away from what we, the arts, lean into is fostering community and speaking to community. So that's Dan, you're on it, and it's a lot headier than answer that I have right now. But when I thought of and heard of the big tobacco analogy, yes, we were inundated with the warning labels forever. Cancer rates rise didn't matter. People kept smoking. It was secondhand smoke where it was not an individual, but it was about community. And that's what we need to start doing with the arts. And that's what I'm hoping this data will help us start to build that story. So then it can be a ripple effect and it can be grassroots. And whether you're in the arts or not, every parent should want their child to have access to that because of the effect that they will get. I just don't know what that it is yet, but that's what I've been thinking about and working on most lately.
That's amazing. I want to pass the question off to Kimberly.
Hello, Dan, thank you for asking that question. My mother was a school teacher and she always joked that there was no child left untested, right? This is an incredible time in history, but full disclosure, I am part of the Collaborative Arts Impact Initiative, but I just wanted to tell a real world example. I have two for this week. One, I literally just before this call finished my OAC grant report that I had to say how I spent the money. I also had to tell, were these events successful? And we used some of the results of our surveying to answer those questions. And it felt really good to be able to say 98% of the people said that they had a great enjoyment, that they felt joyful, they felt less stressed. It was really great to be able to put that into not just anecdotal stories, because I have a million of anecdotal stories. It's my entire life, it's an anecdotal story. And then the other thing is I am meeting with a really significant funder this week, and that's at the top of my list because it's a funder from a big corporation that all they do is numbers. I joke that I get paid in goosebumps, right? And this funder is going to want to know stats, numbers, so I can take the numbers and then tell a goosebump story to go along with it. So Angela did not pay me for that endorsement, but I have to hop off, but I wanted to make sure I shared that. So thank you all. Wonderful to see you.
Thank you, Kim.
Bye. Good to see you.
Right there. I did not know those stories. Yes, Kim has been part of the cohort. That's what we're hoping, is that this data will empower organizations to use it to build sustainability and capacity. And the hope is that it will become not just a 20 cohort, but that again, these was proof of concept. Can we measure these things? Can we measure the wow and the empathy and smiles and critical thinking? Okay, now that we can, how do we get this to as many people as possible? So that's the phase that I'm on now, is to show the data as it's coming in. I probably shouldn't. Well, I've got a call with the Mellon Foundation in 2 weeks. They've heard about the program and they're interested. They want to know what we're doing. I hope as many people can learn about it and use it, because you all do such tremendous and vital work. And I spend every day trying to help get that across to as many non-creatives as possible, so they can understand, if they would only look at their nearest art center or arts educator, so many things could be so much better. And that is coming from someone who's not with an arts background, but I'm determined to help shift the tide in that thinking and shifting mindsets.
It's amazing. It's amazing the work that you are doing now and what you have done throughout COVID. You have done so much for our community, and especially Ohio. People that I've been meeting outside of Ohio really are kind of in awe of what this state has been able to do for the arts. I know that we're coming down to the end. Of course, this will be recorded and shared to our YouTube channel. But before we go, Angela, well, I know you've got your Arts Redefined podcast, and I want you to talk about that briefly and kind of put the call out for who you might be looking for to join you in those conversations. But also, how can those of us on this call, those in the performing arts world, help you with what you're currently doing and help with the mission?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, again, success I feel comes from when we're a collective and we're all working together. I entertain talking with any of you one-on-one. I can only do the work as informed I am from those that are in the field, on the ground, doing work day to day. When I can understand what struggles and concerns you have, but also where do you look for successes, that all helps inform me and my work. If you can help me with the analogy of secondhand impact from the secondhand smoke, let's have those dialogues. I would love to brainstorm. And yeah, the podcast really was a way for me to just get into conversation with individuals about their experiences in the arts and talk about how we can reframe what art means so it resonates in a more broad landscape. Certainly, when it started, I didn't think that we would be in this political or in landscape today. Um, I thought, and I'm positive, right? So this will sound like a downer, but I want you to know that this is positive. I thought COVID was the inflection point. I thought when we went through that, okay, we've got to change how we operate and how we think and fund the arts, because at that time, funding was just this continual cycle of endlessness. And I was disappointed when I saw that when we came out of that, organizations were falling back into the way that they operated or thought before the pandemic, because it's I know it's easier to do that, and we've always done it this way. Um, Unfortunately, I think where we are today, this is another inflection point, and I'm not sure. I've heard from some that it's harder and it's worse than COVID because there isn't going to be one-time funding available. Ticket sales are down. People are just kind of collectively waiting and holding their breath, and that's true. I've heard of sporting events and things like that. So I think we must stay together, and I think that we must use the same language. We have got to get out of economic impact. We've got to get away from call your legislator, and we've got to start thinking more creatively. How do we hit pockets where these stories can resonate? And I love Kim's example about going to a funder who's corporate, who's about numbers. We've got to start speaking their language so they can understand that the work that we do, we can meet non-creative sector where they are, because we're the cross section of all industries. Elizabeth or Jessica's heard me say this forever. Especially here in Ohio, we talk about we want to be the most innovative state. And I say you can't be innovative if you're not creative. And we look at silos of industries that the state wants, and we talk about bringing back manufacturing and tech and all of these things. But the only thing that's the cross sector to all industries is creativity, and that's the creative sector. And so we've got to continue to have those conversations and show it. The data is just one way that I'm hoping we can prove it again in their language. But again, I'm here. I'm open to have any conversation and get any thoughts that you want to share. That I welcome that. And Jessica, anybody outside of Ohio who hears the work, you can share my name. And
Great.
it's gonna take us to be an army to do that. And I've heard from people saying, we want direction, we need tools, we need something, and I'm hopefully helping. I just want to be that support to empower you to be able to do the job that you do in a deeper and more meaningful way, and at a greater capacity.
That's great. That's great. So for those of you on this call and for those who will be watching our YouTube after this is shared, if you want to get in touch with Angela, you can visit melecacreative.com. That's MELECA creative.com. You are inviting folks to reach out to you to join you on your Arts Redefined podcast. So feel free, not feel free, please go to her website, go to the YouTube channel, start watching those. You post so much on your social media. You have great conversations, deep conversations. This has just been so wonderful. I know, as with you speaking at our 2024 conference, we can go on probably for another hour or two. But just so you know, Angela and I are going to reconnect because our 2026 conference is actually going to be hosted in Hamilton, Ohio, October 18th through 20th, 2026. So mark your calendars. But Hamilton, Ohio, I believe they have the offsite Miami campus there, correct?
Yeah, Miami University.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're gonna connect, and I'm sure that we will have continued conversations. And Angela won't be able to leave us, so she'll probably be pulled back in to talk with all of you at that conference, and we'll work with Miami University as well for with all the work that the students are doing there to assist in this programming.
Yep.
Go
And
ahead.
I dropped in the chat a link. I've been doing a lot more lately on LinkedIn and doing a weekly newsletter, and a lot of the data and all of what we're finding, I will be posting in that newsletter. So if you happen to be on LinkedIn and you would like to subscribe to that, I dropped the link in the chat. And again, you can reach out to me and have a conversation. If you have any questions, want to give me your 2 cents, that would be great. But again, we'll be sharing the data as we're getting it and showing how we're using it in real world examples. So that's probably the best access right now to information as it comes out every week.
Awesome. Awesome. Angela, thank you so much for joining us for this Tuesday Talks, and we will be in touch with you we'll be in touch with you again soon. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. I really appreciate you all. Stay tuned for our next 6 months of Tuesday Talks that we will announce shortly. Take care, everybody. Angela, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.